Greetings, everyone. It's a real exciting moment for us, I think, to be here and to be starting off this global conference. My name is Marcus Bussey, or Dr. Marcus Bussey, and I'll be the MC for this session. And I'm just going to say a few words of general introduction and to sort of get us on the way. So the first thing is that we can celebrate. We've got 32 programs ready for you with over 70 presenters here and also more than 800 registrants. That's quite remarkable. We've entered the brave new world of video conferencing, of course, and I would assume that many of you have probably done video conferencing before. So this brave new world is obviously a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us all. And this is a chance to, of course, to connect and to share, and we should not pass these chances or opportunities by. The development of the program, the conference program, has been an exciting journey for those involved. It's involved tapping into networks, in order to get the workshops up and running. An amazing number of people have stepped forward and volunteered their time just to make this the conference it is. I'm assuming that many of you have put yourself on the conference map, but if not, don't worry. There's plenty of time over the next 3 or 4 days to do so. And there's a little bit of time also dedicated in this session for you to do that and for us to introduce you to some of the technology that's going to be supporting in the background the conference and the network opportunities that you've got here as well. So, in this session, it's packed, but we're going to get through a number of important things. And I'm just pulling down my screen of notes to make sure that I'm now able to connect more with you all visually. We've got to start somewhere, and I think we've got to remember that this conference is about the future. It's about the future and how we are all active participants in creating futures for the world that we would desire, especially for children and for grandchildren and for children not yet born, for all of those generations into the future. So we should turn really to the children's voices right now at the very beginning so that we can actually hear from some children. There's a group of children in Thailand, for instance, that we've luckily got a recording for, and we would like to share that with you now. They're from a project called Ban Unrak, run by Didi and Anuraga. And I'm going to pass over to the technical guy, Chaitanya, who's going to actually put on the video for us and kick this conference off in style. Thank you very much.
I'm 14 years old. When I grow up, I want to be a singer, dancer, and artist.
Hi, my name is Latika. I'm 14 years old. When I grow up, I want to be a chef because I like to cook. I want to make the people become strong with my healthy food.
Hi, my name is Loshana. I'm 17 years old. When I grow up, I want to be a teacher. I want to teach and guide them in a good way.
Hi, my name is Mali. I am 17 years old. When I grow up, I want to be a nurse. I want to help sick people to become better and healthy.
Hello, my name is Vijay. I'm 40 years old. In grade 8, I want to be a policeman. I want to help people from the bad things.
Hi, my name is Pulea. I'm 15 years old. When I grow up, I want to be a drummer. I want to make people happy by my wonderful music.
สวัสดีค่ะ หนูชื่อเด็กหญิงปณิตา หนูอายุ11 ปี อนาคตหนูอยากเป็นคุณครู เพราะแม่บอกให้หนูเป็น
สวัสดีครับ ผมชื่อไกรสอนอายุ8ครับโตมาผมอยากเป็นทหารครับช่วยเหลือมนุษย์แล้วก็ปกป้องโลกครับ
สวัสดีค่ะ หนูชื่อเด็กหญิงใบเฟิร์น หนูอายุ11 ปี อนาคตหนูอยากจะเป็นหมอและหนูอยากช่วยคนอื่นที่ป่วย แล้วเหมือนที่หนูใส่ใจกับเพื่อน
สวัสดีค่ะ หนูชื่อโมเดเลนะคะ อายุ15 ปี หนูอยากจะเป็นนักตีกลองค่ะ เพราะว่าเสียงดนตรีเนี่ยมันสามารถเยียวยาผู้คนได้ แล้วก็
My problem is I don't have Thai ID card. I'm not Thai. It is difficult to go out from district. I have to prepare documents several days to ask permission.
I have to stuck in the same place. I cannot go anywhere because I'm not Thai and I don't have Thai ID card, and that is my problem.
แต่ปัญหาของหนูก็คือหนูเนี่ยไม่มีบัตร มันก็หนูเนี่ยก็ไม่สามารถที่จะไปเล่นดนตรีต่างจังหวัดอะไรอย่างนี้ เพราะหนูเนี่ยอยากจะมีโอกาสเหมือนเด็กไทยทั่วไป หนูอยากจะมีบัตร
I want to help society by teaching children to draw because drawing will make them have a creative imagination, concentrate and relax.
I want to see society in a joyful happiness, helping, sharing, and no hurting, and live by justice.
I want to see the world healthy, people loving each other, and keep the world in peace.
I want the world to be sweet because I want to give the children to have joy and fun.
I want society to be kindness, caring each other, and live together by love.
หนูอยากให้สังคม มีแต่ความรัก ความให้อภัย และความแบ่งปัน และหนูอยากให้โลกมีแต่ธรรมชาติ แล้วไม่อยากให้โลกร้อน ทุก
อยากให้โลกสมบูรณ์สวยงามครับแล้วก็
ถ้าเกิดในสังคมนะคะ ถ้าเกิดคุณเลิกใช้ถุงพลาสติก คุณเปลี่ยนโลกเปลี่ยนค่ะ ขอบคุณค่ะ
Some people are good manners, but some not. So we have to control of the emotion.
We are waiting for a light to guide us forward, a sign to go us onward to a place that we can call home. We are waiting for a light to guide us forward, a sign to go us onward to a place that we can call home. Pauselessly moving on, eyes fixed on the crimson dawn, bringing all along, together we'll paint a new day. Pauselessly moving on, eyes fixed on the crimson dawn, bringing all along, together we'll paint a new day. We are waiting for a light to guide us forward, a sign to go us onward to a place that we can call home. We are waiting for a light to guide us forward, a sign to go us onward to a place that we can call home. Gonna take some time to change, gotta think in a whole new way. One human family sharing in a common victory. Gonna take some time to change. Gotta think in a whole new way. One human family sharing in a common victory. We are waiting for a light to guide us forward, a sign to go us onward to a place that we can call home. We are waiting for a light to guide us forward, a sign to go us onward to a place that we can call home.
Thank you. So it gives us a taste of what is happening in the world and the role that aspirations and hopes play, but also the difficulties, the very structural difficulties that people face. This conference is going to deal with these kinds of issues through a range of lenses. We ended with a song because singing and the arts are as important, and you'll notice that the conference, in between the various sessions, there are opportunities where music is shared and so on. But I would like to point out a couple of things. We have chat running, and it would be great to have your thoughts appearing there, and we'll be introducing you later on to how we can use chat and the questions there to actually stimulate further discussion and conversations. Because a conference is not just about, let's say me, a talking head talking to you, it's about sharing and interacting and growing the conversations that we all need to engage in. Now, just before we move to the next segment, I just want to remind people about what we call Zoom etiquette. Zoom etiquette is where essentially you keep yourself muted at all times unless you are invited to ask questions or engage in some way. It's also lovely to see as many of your faces as possible when we are doing this kind of stuff. Otherwise, it's kind of like I'm talking in a vacuum, or Dada is, or whoever will be presenting. So just a little bit there on that. Now, it's a real privilege for me to introduce the president of the Neohumanist movement, Dada Shambhu Shivananda. And he's going to be offering us his opening speech, which is full of really rich thoughts, I know, because I've cheated and I've had a look at it, but it's a great speech. I'm going to pass over to you to welcome everybody officially to this conference. Thank you, Dada.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. All my dear friends, esteemed colleagues, and the well-wishers for a brighter future, it is my great pleasure from the core of my heart to extend a very, very warm welcome to all the participants on behalf of dozens of volunteers and presenters of this 2020 Neohumanist Conference. We are greatly encouraged by the overwhelming response from every corner of the globe. Thank you very much for joining us in this event. You know, the world is faced today with multiple crises, leading to widespread economic strain and psychological stress. The pandemic has created havoc. The health of the people is at risk. Communities face disasters more frequently as climate change poses new threats. And if we are not prepared, these calamities turn into disasters. Xenophobia spreads. Gender and racial inequality still pervades. Trust in information and science is declining. Authoritarianism is on the rise. Wealth disparities see no sign of ebbing. Materialism still dominates. Moral and cultural degeneration is a serious concern. Fear and insecurity abound, the list is endless. At such a critical juncture, we are hosting this global virtual conference with the hope and conviction that we can face the challenges to build a loving, caring, and nurturing society where each living being born on this earth can thrive and reach their full potential. The neo-humanist vision of humanity strives to broaden the scope of humanity to include loving care for all forms of life on earth. How can all creatures be enabled to collaborate and live in peace with self and each other? I am delighted to report that almost 800 delegates from 80 countries have come forward to begin this initial dialogue on the new humanist solutions for a world in crisis. And these people who have registered with us, they are from Mongolia to Timor-Leste, from Sweden to South Africa, from Canada to Peru and Bolivia, and they from all parts of the world. And we are conscious that not all can be present in every session. And that is why we have made the provision for recording each session so that nobody will be deprived of what goes on in each session. Now, neither these crises are likely to end with this conference, nor our determination to find out and highlight innovative solutions will stop following this conference. So let us consider this virtual global gathering as a baby step and build upon whatever we share during the next 3 days. In this conference, we are seeking a deeper understanding of the issues facing today's world. We hope to identify common patterns in today's problems that we as humanity face. We encourage thinking beyond the silos of academic discipline or practice and exploration of linkages between seemingly distinct problems to inspire innovative solutions. We hope the conference will strengthen the connection between neo-humanist theory and practice, mobilize broader, more diverse participation, and build bridges and collaboration between disciplines, projects, and individuals. Thematically, this conference is spanning diverse areas such as personal and social transformation, socioeconomic system alternatives, climate changes and disaster preparedness, food security and agriculture, sustainable energy and habitats, global governance, social equality in terms of gender, race, or marginalized communities, education, microvita as a new scientific paradigm, yoga, meditation, health and well-being, arts and consciousness, planetary leadership, and all the allied topics. The task we have undertaken is not easy. We are very privileged to have among us many leading academics, new humanist thought leaders, devoted practitioners, artists and musicians, activists, relief workers, educators, researchers, historians, wellness guides, futurists, and the voices of both wise elders and young visionaries. We look forward to your inputs and guidance, as well as we continue to build broader coalitions and alliances for a better future for all. From the floor, I hear many voices, Like we cannot solve the problems from the same level of consciousness which has created them. So we must work unitedly towards raising the collective consciousness of one and all. Also, we need a moral framework. It appears some of the biggest problems are not technical issues, but moral issues. Who will bell the cat? How shall we reverse the power balance in favor of the collective interest rather than mere individual interest for selfish pleasure? It is always easy to see problems outside than to see the devil within us. I also hear the future is not a destination, but a direction. The future is not carved in stone. We together can co-create the future with our collective will and united efforts. And we cannot go on the old merry way. We have already crossed the planetary boundaries of resource usages. We need to rethink our development alternatives and the growth models that have become sacrosanct despite being proved unsustainable and unviable. We cannot also go on back to the old normal because the old normal was no longer working in the first place. So we need new narratives, new pathways for the future that are pragmatic and workable options. Furthermore, I also hear that impossible is possible. One can hardly imagine that a small seed can become a big oak tree and live for hundreds of years, providing shade to the passers-by. The neo-humanist ideology is such an optimist worldview, which is an all-inclusive, transformative, and progressive. It blends reason and faith and offers hope for a better world for all species on the earth and for all times to come. So with this conviction, I want to add that everybody wants freedom, happiness, prosperity, progress, and justice. Every community, every individual wants it. But we cannot have these unless entire humanity adopts a lifestyle that respects the interest of others as well as their own. Human civilization is like a tree. The moment we separate the trunk from its roots, the entire tree, along with its branches and leaves, become dry. This is the condition of the society today. We have separated ourselves from our spiritual roots, and the net result is a world divided by factionalism, vested interests, and self-centered politics. Neo-humanism calls for allowing the light of spirit to be brought into our lives and relationships. Wisdom will sprout and flourish in such an environment of live and let live. If we wish for changes to occur in the world today, we cannot lose sight of deeper narratives that underpin our belief systems. We need a deeper reflection on why we are all here on this earth and what is our individual and collective responsibility. Energy, ecology, economy, health, education, governance, and culture are all intertwined, but their intimate connection lies at the submolecular level. Hence, a microvita-led new scientific paradigm and intuition-based neo-humanist worldview could possibly help us greatly in building a harmonious world beyond the apparent contradictions, complexities, and chaos. Let us find a way where the interests of one and all are respected and honored, including the other species and the seeming mute earth. When we begin to recognize the interconnectedness between us and everything else in this cosmos, we shall no longer find ourselves powerless. Rather, we shall know that the force that guides the stars is also within each one of us, and surely it will lead our way towards a blissful future for one and all. Thank you very much for your time, and welcome once again. Back to Mano.
Thank you very much, Dada. And now this is where we should have some canned applause, right? So we can all clap. But Dada's message is really key to the whole point of us being here, and it's a call. And neo-humanism is a call. It's not something that you just find in books. It's actually something we live, and this is a key thing we need to understand, that our lives actually speak for our values and the choices we make. And Dada, you outlined that so beautifully. There will be an opportunity to ask some questions a little bit later. Right now, I want to pick up on something that Dada pointed to, because the next speaker is a world-renowned futurist. And his name is Professor Suhail Inayatullah. Dada was talking about the future, and the future as a calling, as a destination, as something that we all work with, but it's not something that's easy to understand or appreciate its role in our life. And Suhail has made a career out of helping people navigate the future by offering various insights into how we can think via scenarios, through better understanding of the way our own ideologies shape our value systems, how we can actually engage with the world around us so that we can challenge our conditioning, and so on. So it's with a real pleasure that our first keynote speaker, Professor Suhail Inayatullah, is going to present first by recording, and then he will be with us so that he can address questions from the floor. And I just want to, before we segue to that recording, I want to point out that in the chat, there are some activity happening, but there are also links there for you to look at and take note of over time, and they will keep reappearing in order that those who come in late can actually see the chat. But I invite you, I was taking hand notes, but you can take notes by popping them into the chat as well. That way we can actually have richer conversations all along. So I'm going to hand over to Chaitanya, who's going to flick us to a recorded message from Professor Suhail Inayatullah, UNESCO Chair in Future Studies.
Thank you very much for this invitation to speak at the opening of the Gurukul Global Conference. Let's begin. My focus is very much on the future. As the world changes, as we participate in changing this world, what's our role, what can be our role, and how do we navigate the currents of change? As we know from the work of Sri P.R. Sarkar, the dream of today will become the reality of tomorrow. The dream of today will become the reality of tomorrow. So the issue is, what are we dreaming? What reality do we prefer? In the late 1960s and early 70s, the work of Oliver Markley suggested that the image leads reality. He noticed the image of a sustainable world, gender cooperation, a more spiritual world, was ahead of the current reality. So they study in history how the pull of the future leads the current reality. Work I've done with Wee Shan Lam, the government of Singapore, talks about the challenge of being ahead. Earlier, he says, working with numerous policy directors, seeing was believing. When they looked at ways to innovate, they would go around the world and find the most innovative cities and learn from them, whether green gardens or smart infrastructure. Today, as they are consistently ranked number one, he says we have to move towards believing as seeing. The image of the future, where we wish to go to, becomes decisive. So what are these emerging images? We know today there's a pandemic crisis of global inequity, a climate change crisis, but are there any pivots we're seeing away from this that we can talk about? The world can be different, will be different in the next 10, 20 years. I would like to talk about some of these pivots. The first pivot is the pivot to wiser. At a recent conference on the future of the Islamic International University, the rector talked about moving away from overly westernized, economic-centric, industry-led, reputation-obsessed, dehumanizing universities and knowledge systems towards something else, a wiser system of pedagogy, a wiser system of learning. Working with the government of New Zealand, we've started to imagine, they have started to work on shifting from GDP to well-being, asking themselves, what could New Zealand look like in 2050? This is a project that's not infrastructure-led, but well-being-led. The language they've used is well-being is central in this future. This creates a society in which the mana of yourself is enhanced by lifting the mana of others. The key strategy is community prevention as infrastructure design. This links to what we might call the global health awakening. The rapid movement towards vaccines, the sharing of information, has started to suggest that we can start to imagine a world of planet, prosperity, purpose, and people. The third pivot we're seeing is the anticipatory city. We're seeing experiments in many cities starting to use knowledge and information, real-time sensors, to start to reduce congestion, increase green spaces, reduce pollution, increase well-being, decrease suicides. So these are anticipatory cities, not just focused on roads, rates, and rubbish, but focused on the image of what can be. The fourth pivot is towards distributed energy and information systems, moving towards fossil fuels to home solar, moving from large towers to street furniture as information. This is using the blockchain wisely, distributed information ledgers. Some of the groups I've been working with imagine the genie of energy, real-time information on our energy use per household, per person, and eventually leading to a world of energy for you anytime, anywhere. The fifth pivot is towards deep sustainability, working with UN SCAP throughout the region. They start to talk about we have to move from pollution as individualistic terms to pollution in the commons, my air to our air. We have to ensure eco-health systems are resilient. We know if we don't do that, zoonotic diseases will keep on increasing. We need enforceable regional agreements at regional association levels throughout the world, Africa, Europe, the Americas, the Asia-Pacific region. So the imagination must lead to enforceable legislation to ensure that the commons are kept safe for future generations. In UNESCO, referring to Asia, they called that moving from the king of plastic to the garden of well-being. The next pivot is the pivot towards inclusion. We're working with a large scientific research center, working on COVID-19 solutions. And this is part of their challenges moving from the traditional way of seeing science. As the director said, challenging white buildings, white coats with white labs. Diversity, they argue, is critical for success. Diversity in thinking, diversity in people. This comes up over and over. Inclusion is foundational for a better society. Working with the government of Egypt, they suggested that if Egypt is to have a manufacturing revolution, it needs to use platform co-ops, AI-led, and bring in those in the informal sector, the people on the street. Give them information about food prices, climate shifts. Find ways of platforms to link suppliers with buyers. Create a far more robust and inclusive system. The government of New Zealand has led in terms of rapid science-based and early decisive policy and strategy on COVID-19. They've done a number of things that have been exceptional. First, the inclusion of Maori. Second, going from the narrative of just me and mine to a team of 5 million. Can we imagine, as Sri Sarkar has suggested, a team of 8 billion? The last pivot is the pivot towards the inner. This is taking seriously inner practice, spiritual practice. We know from the scientific data, hospital resource use drops 42%. 42%. There's considerable gains to be made there. Heart disease drops dramatically as well. Among the elderly, they live longer. So there's considerable health gains and social gains and financial gains towards moving towards the inner. During this COVID-19 crisis, we've called this perspective the needed pause to slow down, reconnect with nature, with friends, with family, and with self. So these are 7 possible pivots moving us out of the current crisis of pandemics in inequity, away from weird towards the wise, towards well-being instead of GDP, towards the anticipatory city instead of the past-based city, towards distributed energy systems and information systems, solar plus AI plus peer-to-peer linking, towards deep sustainability, towards inclusion, and towards the inner. But of course, we should be realistic as well. While the dream creates the future reality, today we know the potential for a zombie apocalypse is global. This is using race and religion to others, to spread fear instead of compassion and inclusion. We know the possibility of the great despair, 10, 20 years of economic crisis may lie ahead of us. Nations could fracture, wars could break out any moment, anywhere. And thus, we're in contradictions about the future. There's contradiction between capital and labor, and now the rise of artificial intelligence. The contradiction between fixed identities, that is, we do as the past was based, towards the possibility of a planetary and humanistic identity, beyond ego and family and race and nation. The possibility of transforming patriarchy, dominator systems, towards partnership systems. The contradiction between traditional industrial meat systems, creating pandemics and climate change, to cellular agriculture, food as software, if you will. And of course, the greatest contradiction, tribalized weapons systems with artificial intelligence, meaning the grandest high ground one can have, and the need for a global and regional commons and governance to manage the new technologies. If we can properly manage science and technology, it could lead to an economic and social boom that's unparalleled, as Sri Sarkar has argued. In our book on Asia 2038, we argue for Asia, but also globally, an imagination of solar with AI, using the past to critically transform the future, to start to create regional confederations. When I was in Hong Kong many years ago, we were in a traditional setting, a beautiful temple, and this was tradition. But when we looked closely at the mandalas, at the ceiling, we saw the warning, the possibility of risk ahead. So the future can be used to imagine an awakening, a new world, but also, of course, the warnings ahead of us. We know the largest warning is, can we move towards global governance, global commons, complex adaptive systems, evolution, or will we fragment? How will we use technologies? Will we stay dominator or cooperative? If we do nothing, we will see the revenge of Gaia, pandemics and climate change, a century of pollution ahead of us. This is nested on social Darwinism, where there's a hierarchy of religion, of race, of gender. Or can we move towards Neohumanism, where in fact humans and nature co-evolve, and I would argue with technology as well, transforming today to create a new tomorrow. These are decisions we're making every day in our thoughts, our practices, our legislation, our global strategies. As Yang Chu said, isn't it here that you take a half step wrong and wake up 1,000 miles astray? For Sarkar, this is the great transition, Yuga Sandhi. There's a hegemonic shift to political power, changes in the nature of reality, challenges to truth. How can we navigate? How can we navigate this changing world? In my work, I've developed what's called a Proud Futures Checklist, a way to figure out what are one's anchors. I argues there's 7 anchors. Anchor 1, I ask myself and ask colleagues, does the leader or policy reduce inequity or increase inequity? That's a critical question. Does money keep on rolling or does money get stuck? The second, does the leader or policy speak in terms of the language of race or the language of humanity? Yes, terrible deeds are done, but we should ascribe them to individuals, not the larger challenge of essentialism. How does the leader get elected? Is it politics of fear or the ethics of inclusion? We know in the world of conspirituality, certain religious groups are blamed. Certain leaders are blamed. And we know this is based on a lack of understanding of science and a lack of individual power. We know in one country, the US, for example, 1 in 4 believe that the sun goes around the earth, says the National Science Foundation. The third anchor is gender. Does a leader or policy support gender equity or coordinated cooperation? As Sri Sarkar has argued, a bird needs 2 wings to fly. We know just in the Asia Pacific region, $850 billion of increased value will occur as the region becomes far more gendered equitable. Is cooperation real or is it pseudo-humanism, what's called the handshake of fascism? Does a leader encourage partnerships and cooperation, or is it mainly about narcissism, me, my religion, my nation first? Or are they thinking about the region, the planet? 5, are the policies focused on just the economy or are well-being and spirituality included? Does the inner have a role in transformation? Does the inner have a role in social life? 6th, and this is crucial, does the leader or policy support innovation? Science and new technologies. We do not wish to go back to the past. In the context of equity and ethics, we can use technology to reduce working hours and increase personal and collective well-being. So this is a world where certainly I would not go as far as symbiosis, but we can imagine conscious coevolution of humans with nature, with technology for the greater good. And this is critical here. Does nature flourish in their policies and strategies? Or is nature without rights? Does nature have no purpose? In conclusion, when we think about the longer term, what will occur? I was fortunate to spend time with physicist Maslin Atman. Earlier, she worked in the UN, the Center for First Contact. And when I asked her the long-term future, she said, remember, evolution favors the efficient. And thus it struck me, the nation state will disappear because it is inefficient in allocating identity. Neohumanism is far more efficient. Capitalism will die a mature death because it's inefficient in allocating resources. There's no maxi, there's no mini. We don't move forward ahead. Patriarchy is inefficient in allocating identity, wealth, and purpose, as there's exclusion of productivity. Religionism is inefficient in allocating community, as there's always someone who will be pushed away, who will be shunned, or worse, eliminated. Materialism is inefficient in allocating purpose and joy. And thus, spirituality is the way forward, purpose with bliss. If you look at the works of Sri Sarkar, his words, I believe it is for these reasons why he said, this is why I say the future of the human race is not dark, rather it is strikingly resplendent. He's offering an image, being on the leading edge of the future. The task of Gurukul over the short, medium, and long term is to start to create that reality. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you indeed. Yeah, a very thoughtful presentation, Sahel. And I'm glad to see that you're here. You were hidden by the number. I was wondering if you were there, and then I saw in the chat it came up. I'm going to read from the chat a comment from Eugenio, who says, "Thank you for sharing your visions of the future. Very awakening presentation." He wants to know where we can get it. Well, this will be, everything's being recorded and everything will be available as the conference rolls out, Eugenio, so that I can answer that bit. We would like to have a choice, a close reading of it. Like say, again, he's going like that. The link is to a document making a call for Venezuela. We need help, and we can help despite the fact that we are in a sanctions mode. Let us find the way. Okay, the future is bright, he says, and namaskar. So, Eugenio, this is a question to Sahel, and you can unmute yourself, I think, and perhaps you can actually ask Sahel this question more directly, because as I've read that, it's not clear exactly what you're asking Sahel for.
Not available, I guess. Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so if that's the case, then we'll leave it there.
Okay, I'm sorry,
Oh,
I couldn't figure out how to
unmute.
I intended to send a private message to Sahil, but yes, I think it's wonderful this opportunity to share from Venezuela, and the document that I am sending is a brieflet really on how we are having a very peculiar, particular situation in Venezuela, and there are important things going on here. And yes, this is going to be part of the future we're facing, and we are developing a movement here at Georgetown sector, and this is just a wonderful opportunity to mingle with everyone around the world. And we hope we can be here as much as possible of the event. And the call is to cooperate each other. Venezuela has been subject of many sanctions, and we have been stigmatized in many ways, and we're going through difficult times. And I think that what we have suffered here is not only the COVID-19 virus, but the indifference virus. And this has also happened with many places in Africa. And I think it's wonderful that most people who reach technologies and first world nations now take a look into the problems they have themselves. But it's also good to acknowledge that there are important gaps in our human society, and that's what I liked about in Sahil's presentation. He talked about integration, and that's basically my thank you.
Thank you. Sahel, would you like to respond?
No, just thanks so much, Eugenio. I think that's exactly what we're trying to say. There's a emerging image of the future. There's some pivots in that direction. And clearly the pandemic has exacerbated the contradictions, and those contradictions will continue to increase in the next 10 to 30 years. And that's the transition we're in, and best wishes to everyone. That's pretty much all you can say. We're in this together. It's this different boats, same storm, and we need some way to have solidarity between all the boats.
Yeah, and that's really important image, Sahel. The use of metaphor. Dada used metaphor of the tree. You've used the metaphor of genies of energy and so on. Could you speak a little bit more about the role that metaphor might change in transition and transformation?
I think the notion is reality is understood from narrative. During the global financial crisis, the Financial Times had a brilliant article said, here's a crisis, we don't know how to speak about it. So all the speaking and analysis we do is based on a template. The purpose of Gurukul is changing the long-term template. So the choices we have in front of us, we can choose narratives that are different from today's stories. These narratives are not just stories, they directly inform global strategy and global policy making. The words we choose, the stories we tell, in fact, not only help us see reality, they shape future reality. And this is why what Gurukul is doing, and this is why Neohumanism is essentially about recrafting our heart, brain, and body. So we see and we create something else. So always being mindful of the stories we use, the narratives we use is in fact a critical part of transformation work.
Yeah, I get that. I'm just reading another chat here. So how thanking to all speakers and organisers. That's just a thank you. Then if we could, I could ask you another question then. So you've mentioned, and as part of your work, I know, is this concept of reframing. So I've just wrote down weird to wise, for instance, or reframing the COVID constraints as the needed pause. Can you speak a little bit further to that, please?
Well, the reframing helps us. For example, if you call something just a flu, then the conclusion there's nothing you need to do, as opposed to this is part of global health transformation. So the language we use either helps us innovate and create more robust policy, or it says there's nothing we should do. So this is why the words and languages used, either they move us forward or they take us backward. In earlier work, I've tried to analyze COVID-19 through the traditional guna framework, tamasic, rajasic, sattvic. So tamasic is blaming others, conspirituality. Rajasic is scientific action. Tamasic is seeing, can we use the real events for a possible transformation? What Roy calls COVID-19 as a portal to a different world. And it depends where one is up in terms of one's own consciousness, but also the narratives help us decide what pulse we want. So the UNSCAT meeting, is it king of plastic? So please send your plastic to Asia and we make money from it. Or do we create a garden of well-being? If it's a garden of well-being, then we need to create a confederation with legislation where it's not my pollution, it's our pollution, our clean air. So as we change the story, we change the possible future, and then we change the possible strategy. So again, if you read through Sri Sarkar's work, it was always, he was creating a new image of the future, and thus you get Gurukul, which is actually trying to do that. Yep. It's about future generations.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And it's great that you're using the, I guess, various categories from based in Sanskrit language to actually stretch our ability to talk about these things. I think that's really important. I've just noticed that Chris Kang has made a post. How can one nudge national education systems, particularly secondary and tertiary, in the direction of the inner or contemplative, given dominant focus on industry theism and the economic imperative? He goes on to say, linked to this is critical wisdom thinking stimulated by philosophical and spiritual reflection.
Having worked with about at least 20 national governments, from PRC, government of Norway, government of Malaysia, government of Singapore, really at the very high levels, what I noticed with every national government is ministers have a narrative called a castle surrounded by hungry wolves. Inside the castle, they feel safe and secure. Outside, they're nervous. The other part of that narrative is its industrial model of education, which worked from the 17th through the 20th century, creating high productivity, and now they're stuck. So when we alert national governments, as Chris is suggesting, your model of education is a used future. It did work at one time. You increase productivity by going from the traditional guild model to the industrial model. That doesn't work in a world of 8 billion where innovation, creativity, and the balance between self, nature, community, and planet is critical for economic productivity and well-being. So most governments I've worked with truly understand that. What they don't know is how do they create a new image of transformation? And two, as the former president of the European Parliament said publicly, he said, we know what the right thing to do is. We don't believe we can get educated. We don't believe we can get elected on doing the right thing. So one is for us in this room, we want to be on the leading edge and create the imagination of tomorrow. When I meet a minister or a prime minister, then their focus is how do I get reelected? It's great for all of you. You're idealistic. I'm trying to get reelected. So what evidence, what words can you give me that help me create the new Gurukul vision, humanistic vision, and help me in 3 years ensure I stay in power? So that becomes the tension and contradiction. The conclusion often is we ask, what's the used future that's not working, and what's the new narrative? One of my favorite ones, someone said, well, actually, one country said the new narrative is not the castle surrounded by hungry wolves, but the jazz orchestra. So students develop excellence. They're just not sitting around being hugged, but they learn how to cooperate. And we know again from Prout work, cooperation is central to evolutionary advancement. And third, through cooperation and individual excellence, you create emergence. The new possibility emerges, which we can't predict from point one. So we have images of the future, but how this plays out, as Eugenio knows well in Venezuela, is plastic time. No one can say what's going to happen 5 years from today in Venezuela. It's unpredictable. So this is what we try to do with educational systems. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it's failure, but this is the whole evolutionary process to challenge the old model, which I've yet to meet an educator that says it's working. It's either a castle surrounded by hungry wolves or a factory where the workers are dying.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Chris, do you want to ask anything further? I'm aware of time and we've got to keep moving, but you may want to follow up just before we move on. And for that matter, anybody else can also interject. So Hal, it's been terrific.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much for joining us and for helping us kick off this event. I know that, and if I'll say this again, Sahel will be presenting in other sessions. So if you're keen to hear more about what Sahel thinks about education, for instance, he's going to be with Didier Nandadeva Priya. Tomorrow, I think it is, I'm not sure. There's out of 32, I've lost track of what the orders are, but Sahel's there and Sahel joins us again. But this I'm only in a pre-recording, isn't that right, Sahel, for the last session, because you can't make that one. But anyway.
I'm happy to, for the East part, I'm happy to show up for the last one, but not for the midnight one where I need to sleep.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, I'll hold you to that. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, going to switch again now. So one of the things that I guess I can only urge people to do is actually do use the chat, as Chris did and Eugenio did, to post questions. We can always come back to them in a moment. But now I have the joy of actually wanting just to share with you, so that I can get you a little bit up to speed with some of the ways that we're trying to develop a community here. Neo-humanism is about co-creation. It's about understanding the real significance of working together to achieve optimal goals And the idea is that, and thank you, Alex. He's put up the Padlet link for the conference networking, okay? One thing I want to point out with this is that you need to cut and paste the link and drop it into your browser. So we're going to go and have a quick look at that. I'm going to do it by sharing my screen. So I can do that, can't I? Now that, so I've got to find where I am. I've got to open this one first. So yeah, if you cut and paste, and I will open up. There it is. Okay, and somebody's already using it. That's excellent. So I'll come back here and share screen now. Share screen. So if you've successfully pasted your that link in to your browser, you should see this. I posted this to kick things off. And what we have is we have Jitendra Goenka from India has left a message there, and it's got his email address. And also we have Alexandra. He's posted his email. He's my IT whiz backup person, just to help with the Padlet side of things. If you notice down the bottom, in the bottom right corner, there is a pink circle with a plus sign. If you click on that, I would invite someone or all of you who are listening, and if you come to this page, click on that and you can add yourself to this, because that way you might think, I want to connect with Jitendra in India because he's doing work that sounds interesting to me. You can also do what I've done, which is this here, which is you can also embed a URL or an image and so on. This is my personal website, Futures Evocative. So this is a way that you can connect. Someone just dropped them in. Thank you so much, Saraswati from Malaysia. Really appreciate that. Now, as you're learning this technology, you can edit your little posts by going to the triple dots at the top here, and you can add, Saraswati, you might add, what is your work? Are you working on a project? Are you a teacher? Are you, and well, we know that Jitendra is an industrialist, for instance. Chaitanya is having his turn. So we can do that. And this link works across the entirety of the conference and after the conference. There is no need for me to close the link down or for the conference host to close it down either. It will stay there as a resource for you, which you can also save if you wish as well, so that you can contact people later on when you might face some other piece of what would I call it? Some other opportunity that needs addressing. So I'm going to, oh, beautiful. There's a systems change alliance from Chaitanya. So yeah, it's quite intuitive once you get started. It takes a little bit of play, and that's also true of the conference map that many have used. So yeah. I'm going to finish at that point because I'm aware that we have time. So I'm going to stop sharing. And now I have the rather odd pleasure of introducing myself. So I'm going to hand over actually to Chaitanya to actually turn to the recording I made, because it has to be played in the Western hemisphere as well, and I'll be asleep, like Sahel said. So I'm handing it over to you, please, Chaitanya, to share Ancestors of the Future. And I will answer a few questions after, if they arise. No sound. I think you have to reshare and click the button down the bottom left corner, Chaitanya.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to figure it out.
Anybody
just
good?
Give me a minute and I'll connect in YouTube instead. Almost there.
I should be talking perhaps. Oh no, here we go. I was going to. Hi there. My name is Dr. Marcus Bussey. I live in Australia and I work at the University of the Sunshine, where I'm a senior lecturer in history and futures. It's a real pleasure to be with you today to give you a little bit of a run through on what it means to be an ancestor of the future. To me, this is a really key concept, and it links very, very seamlessly with the neo-humanist big picture, but also with the practicalities, I think, of applied living, I guess a sense of philosophy, perhaps you might say. Neo-humanism is a philosophy, but it's also a practice. But we'll touch on that a little bit later. I've got a few points that I'd like to make, and of course this talk is actually only a short talk, so it's not going to take particularly long. Big picture. Over here we've got the Big Bang, and you know, it makes sense when I say this, but you may never have thought it. You of course may have. We were at the Big Bang. All matter that makes this, you know, material universe was there at the beginning of everything. It wasn't in the forms that we see it as now, because it was way too hot back then. But this Big Bang has been flowing on, and it gives us the framework for this amazing story, this human story that we're living through now. Okay? And I just want to remind you that the great and famous Carl Sagan pointed out that we're all stardust. And as stardust, that means we are cosmic beings. And it's Michio Kaku who sort of talks about the evolutionary processes that sit behind this. And he said, look, the whole purpose of evolution from the universe's perspective is to come to know itself. And it knows itself through the sentient beings that emerge from this matter. Okay, so the human being is a witness to the universe. And as far as we know, we're yet to find other witnesses with the same reflective capacity as we have in this vast universe. But because the universe is vast, of course, we know that statistically it's very likely that there are many, many other planets with sentient and aware beings on it. But I want to challenge sentience in a minute. But, you know, this sense of witnessing means that we suddenly are able to see the universe. In other words, you have to step back to see the universe. In other words, you step out of the universe, in a sense, to observe it. And that's led to an interesting side effect. And so, in a sense, this awareness, this self-awareness that we have as a species has had come at a cost. Because in my books, and I teach this quite a lot, human beings are the lonely species. We are the species that stands outside of the realm of matter. We observe matter. We observe all the processes, the physical processes, the biophysical, the biological processes, and so on. And we become very good at labeling and categorizing and all that sort of stuff. And that means our consciousnesses look at the world as a set of objects around which we we manipulate them to achieve our ends. So, having established that, I want to talk a little bit about consciousness from a neo-humanistic perspective. From neo-humanism's perspective, all matter has some form of consciousness. Okay? As Sahel said in his talk that precedes this one, evolution favours the efficient. What does that mean? Well, it means that rocks are less efficient, okay, vehicles for consciousness than protozoa. And protozoa are less efficient beings for consciousness than the human being. So the purpose of the neo-humanist story then is to reduce this separation that humanity feels, a separation from the observed universe. The subjective and the objective out there, we need to bring together some form of rapprochement, some way of being in but not of being part of but not lost in that being. In other words, when we're part of a culture, we can be totally French or totally Greek or totally Indian or totally Arisan or Tamil or totally, yeah, and we get down to smaller and smaller units like that. If we're in nature and we've observed an animal in nature, we can see that they are totally part of the grace that is the living biospherical world. But they're embedded in it. To our perhaps limited perspective, animals are not as conscious of their embeddedness in the natural world as we are, because we have separated ourselves from the natural world. And that's important to understand. So it's all about making us a little less lonely. So if we're looking at consciousness, then it can take two particular forms. Human beings, once we stepped out of nature, you might say, and stepped into culture, you know, we started seeing everything in discrete bits. I already mentioned we categorize things and so on. So this is the analytic faculty of consciousness. But neo-humanism is a synthetic philosophy that takes us from that analytic point, that critique of the observed universe and the observed social forms we inhabit and so on, which we keep trying to better, okay? And it takes us into a more balanced relationship, as I suggested, between the objective world and a subjective reality. For me, this is the key to understanding what critical spirituality is about, because spirituality itself is the relational dimension of our consciousness, that synthetic aspect of our consciousness. But when we become critical spiritualists, or critically spiritually aware, we start to assess the quality of the relationships. So my relationship with the animals and plants, what is it like? Is it an equal relationship, or is it a relationship that's predatory for humanity's sort of seizing and grasping nature? So when we start asking questions about the relational quality, we're actually asking very deep questions that challenge the very foundations of cultural supremacy over nature. So then we've got brains that are first synthetic, I think, and certainly this is the sort of understanding of an embodied consciousness. This is me here, the whole of me type thing, and an analytic consciousness, which was the secondary form of consciousness that emerged out of cultural forms. I want to give you a very short case. Image of Patty Lather there. Patty Lather is a critical philosopher, a feminist, a critical pedagogue, and she's retired now. She's been writing since maybe the early 80s, late 70s even. I came across a really influential paper, influential on me, but also I think broadly influential in the mid 1980s at some point, where she talked about critical pedagogy, critical and critical feminism and so on. It was a really interesting paper, and it really helped me think my way through at a philosophical level how to teach better and why I do what I do intuitively. But, you know, within a decade, she'd moved into something, for her, much more challenging, but obviously I think also much more rewarding. she began working as a sociologist with people dying from AIDS. And she was trying to use categories that she'd used comfortably to talk about something more objectifiable like social relations, to explain the what was happening to mostly these young men who were dying of AIDS. And she couldn't. She was lost for words. And she writes about this in a deeply moving way. And she started using metaphor to try and explain this. The metaphor was of the angel. So the angel speaks to that which is out of reach of analytic comprehension. For her, she had to turn to some traditional metaphor. She had to take something that she knew from the cache of, a Christian culture, for instance. She's American, North American, and she had to bring it into her conversation. And she was criticized quite a lot for taking this particular approach, but it was because she stood face to face with suffering and death, and her critical, analytical mind couldn't find ways of giving it language, giving it form. Okay, so I want to bring in the metaphor of the ancestor of the future. It's not my metaphor. I was very luckily at a conference in presentation in 2003 where I was on the panel with an Indigenous Australian woman, Maureen Watson, who passed away in 2009. Amazing woman, and really very deep thinker. And Maureen blew the audience away, who were all government officials. We were working with the Department of Family and Justice and Economics and so on for the Queensland government. And she said, I want to remind you all that you're ancestors of the future. And of course, this provokes us to think, if I'm an ancestor, what kind of ancestor am I? For her, if you think about ancestors, especially from an Indigenous perspective, you're stepping out of linear time, out of this narrow present, into an extended present of some kind. The image behind me now is an image that a friend of mine drew for me. I conceptualized it based on work of Elise Boulding, of the 200-year present, but I wanted to throw out the 200-year. I just wanted to suggest that there are presents behind us, presents now, pasts behind us, and this is plural, and there are futures before us, because we're all in unique trajectories and coming from unique different places behind us in terms of the ancestors that we follow from and the ancestors that we will become as we extend our timeline into the future. So there's this sense of folded time. So for me, I want to sort of give you a couple of points about, not a couple, I want to give you, 6 or 7 points now on, how I see neo-humanism working then and its relationship with this ancestor of the future concept. Firstly, we live in or inhabit an extended present in which we are ancestors of the future, but we are ancestors with other ancestors, and that our relational networks are fractal. They go out in multiple ways at multiple levels. It's no longer this linear thing of grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and so on. It's much, much more than that, because it's a relationship of responsibility. Okay, neo-humanism engages with our traditions, so creative traditionalists appear, where we take our traditions and we edit them to get what is rich and empowering and builds capacity for us to take it into the future. We can't go into the future naked. We always go into the future with traditions. In other words, some people quite rightly say that, if we're thinking business as usual, that the future is already colonized with assumptions about the future. But if we become actively engaged with our traditions, as Maureen Watson was with her Indigenous Australian traditions, thinking Laura Harjo in the United States, we're talking about Indigenous futurity. She's drawing on deep Indigenous traditions, but she's being extremely creative and flexible with them. It's fascinating to see this. There are challenges. Neo-humanism challenges the ancient sentiments of love for country and for associations of group, so sort of social groupings. It puts relationship before domination. It links action and reflection. And that's really important to understand. So there's a pragmatism there, which is the philosophy of linking I guess, philosophical concepts with the actions and the effects that they have. It links the world out there with the world in here, as I said a bit earlier, and it suggests a deep curriculum for life and for education also, which of course is why you often find Neohumanism being spoken about within the educational context. So I've got two more points I really want to make, and one's a sort of a shopping list, I guess, and it's to act across time, okay, is to be an ancestor. Is to feel kinship with all things, is to be an ancestor that takes that as a starting point for action on behalf of. We take responsibility for our relational obligations. To be an ancestor means to recognize that each of us is a unique offering to this cosmic whole. Okay, we witness independently and individually as subjectivities. We have a subject macro object relationship with cosmic consciousness or cosmic being. Okay, it's to strive to deepen those connections on behalf of the whole, and it's also to love across separations that isolate us, to push back at those social conditionings that separate us into groups, into categories, whether it's a gendered category, whether it's ethnicity categories, whether it's categories to do with illness and or aging youth and the elderly, should I say. It's also about categories around dogma, you know, being a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Hindu or an indigenous spiritual person or a New Age spiritual person. It's about pushing back on that and being able to love across that separation. And finally, to me, it means to live lives as ancestors of the future, to take everything seriously, which is why a Gurukul conference like this is about suggesting that we can think about education, formal, non-formal, informal, across a range of spectrums. It's about being transdisciplinary. It's about engaging with different ways of knowing the world. It's about being curious and exploring, allowing, but taking very seriously our commitment to the future generations and to the more than human that we inhabit, which is why I'm ending with that slide behind me here. Thank you very much. So that's my take on the ancestors of the future. It's for me, it's important to understand the nature of our relationship with time and therefore with action. Now, I'd love to answer a couple of questions, but I'm also aware that we actually don't have much more time before this session finishes. And no questions appeared in the chat, which I have open here. So are there any observations, questions, need for clarification from the listeners?
So Marcus, if I understand you correctly, what you are saying is that it is our present level of consciousness which is going to determine the future. So in that sense, we are the ancestors of the future because our level of consciousness today is going to dictate what happens tomorrow. So if our consciousness is still tribal, then what we are going to see ahead of us is also again tribal fights and things. But if we change our level of consciousness and elevate it to the neo-humanist consciousness, then down the road we can actually see the manifestations of it, because there is a time lag between today and tomorrow. So is that what is the
that's what you yes, and thank you. You said it very well. The fact that we see the world in parts and in categories has helped us get so far, but now we need to actually allow ourselves to see things as from a relational dimension. So it's kind of like picking up from, let's say, learning, particularly from Indigenous peoples from the past and the present who've seen the world that way. And we pushed it away to build big civilizations. Now we need to actually embrace that. But as Sahel said, it's a co-evolutionary thing. This is what he was emphasizing in his talk, that we need to co-evolve, but not just with one another, but with the more than human, with the animal and world, with the planet, and also with the technologies that we cleverly create all the time. So it's about learning to trust the relational and to actually start to explore its potential, which of course is what neo-humanism invites us to do. Yeah, so Hal's asked, can we talk about the tension between living in the preferred future and the constrictions of today? Yeah, so said this, there are contradictions everywhere. And the contradiction between the world that seems to be set in concrete or stone today and the preferred futures that we aspire to and that we nurture in our private lives, that we often nurture as social activists as well, or engaging in conversations at the levels of academia, or in Sahel's case, he works across academia and the political institutional. This is where we are all seeking to touch on that which is possible whilst acknowledging the work that we need to do right now with the real world around us. How do we help people overcome fear? How do we help people learn to trust? How do we help people put aside their need for narrow identities, for broader identities, and so on? Chris says, multiple points of resonance, especially Indigenous futurity. I love that book. It's sitting right next to me on this desk. Again, building upon Sahel's question, the challenging and seeming obstruction of received metaphors. We're in a sense, we're in between stories. The old story is cracking and breaking, and we are seeding new stories. A conference like this is seeking to explore multiple approaches to seeding the new, to planting the seeds, nurturing them, and exploring them. We still have the past on our back, and it's colonized the present with multiple anxieties, multiple issues that we need to not resolve, because I don't think there are clear answers. Evolution may, as Sahel said, and I picked up on, may favor the efficient, but efficiency is not like that. It's not an industrial form of efficiency. It's a process of becoming more efficient and more inclusive so that we can actually build sustainable futures into for all of us, all planetary stakeholders. Yeah. So, and Marianne asked, is neo-humanism also talking about the fifth dimension? The fifth dimension as in the book, or the fifth dimension as in that, I need a little bit of clarification there, Marianne. Can you please elaborate? Maybe ask me personally rather than popping in the chat. Okay. Oh.
Mariana, you need to...
yeah, I need some clarification.
Unmute.
Yeah, can you unmute yourself? I already gave you.
Yeah, now I am unmute. Yes. Yeah, it was a very nice lecture. I loved it. And I ask this because many of my spiritual friends and many books that they give me to read and so are talking about that we are now entering the fifth dimension. And it's coming a massive light. Yeah, the big sun in the solar system is coming through, and it's coming a lot of light. And I just wonder if that is part of the thinking in neo-humanism also.
Certainly the revolutionary capacity to transform needs to be understood as something that can happen very quickly. In evolutionary terms, we talk about the galloping evolution where there can be long periods where the dinosaurs were there, and then suddenly, very, very quickly, in terms of evolutionary terms, they're no longer there. So we are definitely coming to some kind of consciousness threshold. Dutta was suggesting that in his reframing of my own presentation. The fifth dimension is one way of describing the pressures on us at the moment, the evolutionary pressures on us, and the opportunities that those pressures offer. So the needed pause, to go back to the metaphor that Sahel offered us for COVID, is that kind of pressure where we're being forced, if we're not cringing in fear, we're being forced to actually open ourselves to the struggles and to the contradictions and the paradoxes that are here. Because whatever that fifth dimension is, using your friend's terminology, that fifth dimension is something that we do not understand from our current level of consciousness, that it is requiring us to go in, but to engage in the world simultaneously so we can grow our consciousness and evolve.
Thank you.
That's okay. And if you want to email me later, we can talk further about it, because that's always an opportunity too. Conversations should never be put aside. But as an MC, I'm also held to task by the time and the clock. And I'm seeing that we're coming up to the very end of the opening session now. And for me, it's been a great privilege actually to be invited to MC this opening session. It's been a great privilege to share this space with you all. It was a delight. Your opening speech and address, Dutta, was fantastic. Sahel's presentation lays the foundations. One of the things that you might notice that both Sahel and I used, we had lists of things, okay? And those lists help us navigate the complexities by simply offering some form of structure. The neo-humanist movement itself offers us structures that are both personal and collective, and they have implications for how we engage with the future. And I really hope that you find your way onto the map. And if you're having difficulties, always send questions through to myself or somebody at the conference website email, and they can pass them on to me. I'm very happy to help you individually if you're struggling in that department. And Alex, thank you so much for sitting in the background. I've noticed that because of the chat, we never actually got to go and look at anything that might have happened in the Padlet world, but that's okay. So I hope you enjoy the conference. I look forward to meeting you in my further sessions, the one on history, for instance, and I will be with you again at the end, facilitating or emceeing the closing session. Dutta, do you have any final words?
Yes, and while we are here, I'd like to invite all of you to join me for the next session, which will be in whatever time it's scheduled for, which is the next session. And I'll be talking about the applied side of neo-humanism, which is building a township of Anand Nagar. But I will be also talking a little bit first the philosophical aspect, the conceptual aspect, and then share some, something about the founder who envisioned it and why it is so special, that, and what he gave. And so I hope that all of you will make it to that session. So I look forward to seeing you all there. And I think in this session, I think Sohail showed the logic of why the present worldviews are not working and why they are inefficient. And I think he created the platform for neo-humanism to show how neo-humanism could do better. And then, but I think what Marcus said is that it's not just the theory, but it is how we imbibe those values in our present day, which are going to determine the future. So that's a very significant contribution to our discourse today. And I hope that this will allow us to go deeper into understanding of both neo-humanism and and how it is applied in different domains, which we'll be doing over the course of next 3 days. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Dada. And I'm going off for a moment it's evening here for me. I can see it's very dark for Eugenia. It must be 2 or 3 in the morning or 4 or something. In Europe, you're getting up. So Mariana, good morning to you. We're all around the world and we are enjoying one another's company. Isn't that a wonderful thing? Thank you. And I will be in touch.